Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. I remember being in 8th grade science class. The teacher asked me to go home, close my eyes, and listen deeply for 2 minutes, and then to write down everything I heard. Have you ever done that? I seriously recommend it, because what shows up is utterly mind-blowing and reminds me of an idea from Ferris Bueller, who noted that life moves pretty fast, and if we don't pay attention, we might miss it. As it turns out, if you want to feel more alive, it's important to listen. And if you want to be heard, the answer is the same. We must listen, according to my expert guest. Best-selling author Julian has given 5 TED Talks about listening and being heard that have been viewed over 100 million times. His messages clearly resonate with people, and for good reason. He's brilliant. As you'll hear in this interview, Julian has an unusual ability to notice important things that most of us overlook but need to pay attention to. His book, called How to Be Heard, is one of the finest communication books I've ever encountered, and I am not alone. Dozens of luminaries have endorsed it, including audio expert Bernie Krause, who said it is clear, powerful, and fun, and the go-to resource for learning how to listen and express ourselves in ways that can only enrich our lives. So, listen in as Julian and I have a conversation about how to be heard. Julian Treasure, welcome to Super Psyched.
Well, Adam, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, I'm so happy. You know, I received an email from TED, and it said on it, Adam, your top TED Talk recommendation is, and it was yours, among the 100 million other people who've watched all of your talks, but I watched 5 ways to listen better, and then another, and I loved them. I listened to your brilliant book on Audible, How to Be Heard, and I need you to know, Julian, I read lots of communication books, and this one simply blew my mind in every which way. It's comprehensive, it's fun, and you pull from so many relevant sources, surprising sources at times, and come up with ideas to improve communication that I'd never even considered.
Well, I'm thrilled that you say that. It's great. And, hearing that from a professional makes a big difference to me. I certainly had good feedback from people around the world, and it's wonderful to know that the book is making a difference out there.
And I think it's so relevant to this time. You note that we are limiting ourselves to 140 characters to be heard. And the fact is, so primal in the human condition is our need to be seen, our need to be heard. And I was wondering if you could speak about that basic human needs. What are your favorite, easy to implement tips to increase the likelihood of being heard?
Well, actually, the big secret in the book, because the book's called How to Be Heard, and the TED Talk on speaking, which is called How to Speak So That People Want to Listen, has been seen by 5 times as many people at least as the TED Talk on listening, the one you started with, which I find very interesting. So there is a deep desire to be seen and heard, perhaps not such a deep desire to hear, listen, and to take in other people. And that's kind of the secret that underpins really most of my work, is this circle of communication, I describe it, where it's not a straight line from speaking to listening. It's not I speak, you listen. It's a circle all the time. And the way you listen affects the way I speak. The way I speak affects the way you listen. And the way I listen affects the way you listen. And the way I speak affects the way you speak as well. So there's a kind of dance going on the whole time between 2 people, or even between one person and an audience. I've given talks all over the world to audiences ranging from 12 to 11,000. And the key is that there's a listening in the room, Well, there's a listening when you're speaking to one person, and it's always unique. So it changes over time, and it changes from person to person. So the listening that you're speaking into it's a unique thing here and now in this moment. And the answer to your question really about wanting to be seen and wanting to be heard is the better you listen, the better other people will listen to you. So if you want to be a powerful speaker, my belief is very strongly, first, you need to become a master listener. And that's rare because listening is a skill, not a capability. But most people confuse that. Most people think listening is a capability like breathing or seeing or whatever. And like hearing. Hearing's a capability, but listening, that's a skill. And it's a skill we don't teach in schools. We don't teach it in universities. Very few people talk about it until, interestingly, it comes to recruiting people, where apparently listening is now very high on the list of skills that are required when organizations recruit people. But of course, the moment they actually get the person in, that disappears. They don't praise listening. They don't reward listening. It's never talked about again, really. It's taken for granted. So I am a passionate proponent of listening, and I believe listening is the foundation for powerful communication.
You know, one of the axioms that I really believe to be true is it's far more important to be interested than to be interesting. And oftentimes someone in my office will ask me, how do I become more interesting? And I ask, well, how interested are you, first of all, before we even go to you becoming interesting? And the paradox therein is at the proverbial cocktail party, when we're talking with someone, it's our capacity to listen that makes us really captivating. And yet you very astutely observe that the idea of being heard is more compelling, as evidenced by the number of views of the TED Talk pertaining to it, which I can only assume led to the title, How to Be Heard, as the lead for the book, because that would at least draw people in. And oh, by the way, little Trojan horse here, because my secret plan is to help you become a better listener, not just to be more captivating and listen to.
You got me. Absolutely.
So that said, I was wondering, because the listeners to this would love some actionable tips, how can they listen better? What are some tips to improve one's listening in general?
Well, first of all, it's important to realize that when you're listening, you're doing something. It's actually work. It's effort. It's not a natural capability. The doorway to this whole thing really is consciousness. If you're unconscious of something, you've got no chance of changing it. So to become a powerful listener, the first thing is to become conscious that you're doing something. And that's wonderful because it's a gift you can give consciously to people. I mean, I wonder, listener, when's the last time you gave somebody 100% of your undivided attention, looking at them and listening to them and putting everything else down? Scott Peck said, and I quote this in the book, you cannot truly listen to another human being and do anything else at the same time. And I think that's absolutely true. So consciousness is the first and most important step. I talk about 4 C's of effective listening in the book. The second C is compassion, and that's about seeking to understand other people. Barack Obama said, I will listen to you, especially when we disagree. And I think that's a very rare trait, especially these days with the internet, which tends to drive us to silos. We go out there not browsing and certainly not seeking counter views. We go out seeking affirmation. Well, I knew I was right. All these people agree with me. Yep, there's all those people over there who don't, but we never talk to them. We never listen to them. And so, unfortunately, the internet, far from bringing people together, is polarizing us. And we see that more and more in politics and in society in general. And in extremism, we just had another murder in my country from that kind of extremism, which most people find very hard to believe. But if you go into a silo and you're there for long enough, it warps your entire reality. I talk about how listening shapes your reality. And that's a very important thing to understand. So I said listening is unique. Yours is, mine is. That's a very important first thing to understand. consciousness, compassion. I can give you the other 2 C's while we're going. Commitment, because it is work. It takes time and it takes energy and effort to listen effectively to somebody. And then the last C is curiosity, ferocious curiosity. It's a wonderful way to treat everybody you meet as an opportunity to learn. It might be an opportunity to learn how not to do things, but usually there is an opportunity to learn. And if you're humble enough to treat everybody as an opportunity to learn, that curiosity will drive much better listening. And as you said, and you're absolutely right, if somebody is interested in a conversation, they become more interesting as well. And it tends to be, that circle of speaking and listening tends to get energized with good stuff, as opposed to dismissing people or considering them to be boring or whatever it might be, or coming from fear. So those 4 C's, I think, are very important in really becoming a good listener. And of course, in the book, I've got lots of exercises which I suggest, which help with listening. I think there's one other thing that we should mention at this point, which is the filters.
Please.
Because it's not a concept most people have. And, most people think, I just listen. And that is so not the case. Every one of us listens through a set of filters. And those filters start from when we're born. We learn a language, and language shapes our listening. We exist in a culture that may be national, regional, city, locality, neighborhood, family, clan, kin, whatever it might be, or, tribes we choose to join. And they change our listening. We tend to pick up along the way values, attitudes, beliefs. We discard some. We pick up others, from parents, role models, teachers, friends, aspirational people that we admire of all kinds. And then in any situation, we will have potentially intentions. We might have expectations. There's a wonderful phrase my father taught me a very long time ago. Expectation is the mother of resentment. So expectation can be a pretty dangerous thing, depending on, whether they're realistic and whether you're actually conscious that you've got an expectation, or it becomes a demand. And then we may have emotions going on as well. And all of those things color our listening. It's pretty hard to listen to somebody when you're very upset. But the opposite of that is also true. If you want to calm somebody down when they're very upset, the best way to do that is to listen to them and repeat back what they've said. And they will simmer down as they feel heard and then understood. And finally, potentially valued, which are the 3 things that we want in relationship, I think, generally.
Well, you're talking about the lesser known powers of listening, because listening in and of itself is not as sexy, ostensibly, as being heard. If you look at the youth today, what do they want more than anything? On average, they want to be famous. And that does not necessarily imply listening. It implies being listened to. And one of the things I've also come to learn through listening to many interviews with many famous people is that on the other side of fame, it is quite anticlimactic. That which they had thought they would attain on the other side of that fame is actually not there. It was an illusion to begin with. And if you think about how our brains, our 35,000-year-old, rather unchanged brains, comport themselves, what we are wanting is an intimate connection. And everything you are about, everything that you put out with your 4 C's and all of the 307 pages of your book are tantamount to us becoming more intimate with ourselves and with another. And even with our appliances, which emit noise at sometimes higher than 40 dB, and you talk about sound in every way that it manifests, most of which we don't pay attention to, most of which we would have no idea that it's actually going on at any given time, and yet is affecting us. Sound is such a big deal.
It really is. Absolutely. It's enormous and yet almost completely ignored.
And I remember training to be a therapist, and I was trying so hard to impart all of my newly acquired skills. And I was working with a person who just needed to be listened to. And I told my supervisor how frustrated I was because I felt like I was just, quote, listening and therefore not providing my client with any tools. And he kindly reminded me that listening deeply to my client was, in fact, very healing, a solid skill, and providing that person with a space to hear himself and to be witnessed by another was a big deal. And I was definitely doing something of substance. And lo and behold, what we're seeing as we research human needs more and more, you can look at Dan Siegel's work on neuroplasticity and our interpersonal neurobiological desire to be attuned to by another and how corrective that can be. You know, recently I've watched a couple of movies that explore the worlds of deaf people, Sound of Metal, about the drummer who loses his hearing, which you actually talk about as a phenomenon that's occurred for people like Pete Townsend and Sting have lost their hearing over the years, as well as Coda, a wonderful movie on Apple TV about a young singer whose family is deaf. And one of the things that you mentioned in your book, or it could have been one of your interviews, was that many people who are in the know would rather lose their sight than their ability to hear, that hearing is so fundamental. And I was wondering if you could speak about some of the surprising aspects, some of the surprising benefits of hearing and, more importantly, listening deeply. How does it benefit us? How does it make us more human?
Well, I talk about the three outcomes fundamentally that you can enhance with powerful communication. I mean, it is speaking as well as listening, but it is underpinned by listening. And those three outcomes are pretty important for everybody: happiness, effectiveness, and well-being. And sound plays such a role in all three of those things. You know, we can think of music that makes us happy, of course, and then there's nature sound. In my company, the sound agency, is deploying biophilic sound, it's called, in offices around the world as an antidote to the kind of sterile and very noisy situations that people find themselves in, and they can't work because they're overhearing other people. Noise is the number one complaint in modern workspaces, and particularly loss of privacy. So sound can help with all of those things, and it's been shown in those situations that it can reduce blood pressure, it can obviously release happy hormones, endorphins, and so forth. Whereas noise, if we're in a situation, and we probably won't be aware of it, we might be standing on a street corner bellowing over somebody drilling nearby, and we don't think about that at all most of the time. That kind of noise increases blood pressure. It releases cortisol, noradrenaline, our fight, flight hormones, puts us in a state of stress. And if that is repeated over time, which it is for many people in many noisy working situations, I'm not talking about deafening noise. I mean, the threshold in the research is something around 65 decibels, which is loud enough that you'd have to raise your voice, but it's the average noise level, for example, in German classrooms now. Because we're doing group work, you know, and classrooms are designed by architects who don't really think about how things sound. So they're all hard surfaces. They've got to be cleanable these days, of course, as well. So everything's getting harder. And all the sound bounces back into the room, and you end up with the teacher bellowing and the children bellowing. And the result is that teachers are probably shortening their lives quite substantially because exposed to noise like that day after day, it dramatically increases your risk of heart attack and stroke and unfortunate byproducts. And that's not the only way that noise is, you know, damaging our well-being if it's not controlled. The point of listening, really, to me, is to take responsibility for the noise I make, and that might be speaking, but, you know, we make a lot of other sound as human beings. You can't make light, but you can make sound, which I think is a really interesting and lovely part of being human. So listening allows me to take responsibility for the sound I make, and also, even more importantly, the sound I consume. What do I let into my ears? What do I surround myself with in my home? So one of the exercises in the book and in the TED Talk on listening as well is savoring, which is effectively tasting the sound around you. Great way to do that is just close your eyes. Go into every room in your house, close your eyes and listen consciously and intently, and ask yourself some questions. Is this the best sound I could have in this room for the things I want to do in there? It might be your bedroom. And typically your bedroom should be very quiet. And tragically, millions of people don't have that experience because there's road noise or construction or something outside their window, and it wrecks sleep. And it's another way in which noise actually ends up being a killer, because you repeat that night after night, and the cost is incalculable. Up to 3% of GDP, according to the European study that was done a few years ago. That's hundreds of billions of dollars in America. I mean, it's absolutely incalculable, the cost to society of noise. And yet, unfortunately, it's not an issue, is it? You never get politicians saying, vote for me, I'll make it quieter.
And how wonderful that would be. I'm so grateful to my wife, who had on her list of criteria when we were choosing a house that it be in a quiet space. And there were at least 10 houses that I would have greenlit that were far too noisy. And she had the wisdom to say no. And I'm thinking about what you're saying about really bathing in music, savoring music, and how much healing I have received from the beautiful sounds of truly great musicians with whom I've spent a great deal of time savoring. You and I both love a song called Riverman. Yours is actually written by someone other than mine. Yours is by, I believe, Nick Drake. Wonderful song, by the way. And I subsequently geeked out to him. Mine is by David Sylvian.
I mean, I agree with you completely. I mean, music is one of the reasons I'm alive. I mean, without music, I would be bereft. And I guess that's kind of having been a musician. Are you a musician?
But so. Yes, I sing fairly well and I play guitar poorly.
You don't have to do it well, but I think the key thing is to play a bit. I mean, years ago, my second TED Talk wasn't one of the finest, but it's all right. It was about sound and health. And one of the recommendations I made in that TED Talk was to take up playing something, even if it's go to a drum circle and just bash away, because playing with other people is a connection. It's
the best.
And if you play in a group or an orchestra or a drum circle or anything like that, you have to learn attentive multi-track listening, which is the way musicians listen. You have to listen to all the other instruments at the same time. And that's the way I listened to the world. That's why I got into the business of doing sound for brands and so forth, which is what the sound agency does these days, and designing soundscapes for spaces like offices and shopping malls and whatnot. By the way, often removing music. I mean, I adore music, but it's not a veneer, and it's not something that I can have on in the background like that. Great music is screaming, listen to me.
Yes.
If you're trying to do something else, it's taking a lot of attention. It's what we call a dense sound. A lot of information, a lot of requirement for attention. I mean, a good tip if people are trying to work, and for example, I talk in the book, I think, about MBA being the strategy if you're in noise and you want to work or think. So move is the first thing to try, because we don't think of that half the time. And you can, and the modern offices are getting better at that. They have what's called activity-based working, where they all have different areas for different types of work. And hopefully somewhere there'll be a quiet area where you can go and sit and be quiet. If you can't move, then the B is block, which is to put on headphones probably. But I wouldn't suggest playing Charlie Mingus or Beethoven because they demand a great deal of attention.
They do.
And if you put that on them, it's a much nicer distraction than the irritation of people talking. Nevertheless, it's a distraction. So you won't be much more productive. You'll be happier. But if the object is productivity, I would suggest birdsong, running water, some sort of biophilic sound, because those sounds have been here far longer than we have. And we're used to them, and it's very easy to carry on. We don't listen to birdsong, we're just conscious of it, and it makes us feel happy and also alert, nature's alarm clock. So that's a very good sound to have in headphones. Music is okay if it's very slow moving and not very eventful. And we created an app years ago, actually, which is still on the App Store, called Study with Echophon. And that's still there. It's free. It's really originally designed for kids who have to go home and work in a noisy kitchen or somewhere, so that they could put headphones on and have 45 minutes of work time. And then it stops and you're supposed to have a rest, and then you can start it again. So yes, music, wonderful, powerful sound, but not something I can work to actually at all.
Interesting, because it demands your attention, and therefore, but birdsong, other biophilic sounds, as you describe them. I'm also guessing that perhaps binaural beats for me, at least, I've noticed to great effect my capacity to write with something that is rather vanilla in tone, but has binaural beats associated with it, can increase my capacity for production. Is that consistent with your own findings?
I don't find that myself, but I think the most important thing about this it's not to make generalizations about it.
Sure.
I say in the book, where, it's one of the agents of miscommunication. The G is generalizations, and they are dangerous things. So generalizing about sound and saying, no, the right sound for everyone to work with you can't do that. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there for whom, they can work really well with loud death metal going on. That
right.
Me. Or bebop jazz, or,
Right.
No, it's too much going on. I can't think with that going on. I could probably work with Brian Eno happening, or, some of the soundscapes that we have designed with Mood Sonic, specifically designed for focus. And so they use high frequency sound, which tends to charge you up a bit neurally, as opposed to low frequency sound, which is discharging and zones you out a bit. And, it's not for nothing that reggae, for example, or club music have got massive amounts of bass. People want to be taken out of themselves with that kind of music, with or without substance assistance. So the bass becomes very important if you want to kind of depart from the scene and not be very present. But if you want to be focused, then pleasant higher frequency sound, and that's again where birdsong comes in, is generally a good thing to use.
Right. And you so beautifully mention the fact that when the birds are singing in the jungle, it means that all is safe. And that primes our 35,000-year-old brains to feel safer, and it activates our parasympathetic nervous systems rather than our fight and flight sympathetic.
I always feel sorry for lions because, birds all stop singing when the lions come.
Right.
It's a bit like they say about the Queen of England thinks the whole world smells of paint because 5 yards in front of her, there's somebody frantically painting everything. You look good.
One of the things that I took such great delight in your book is that around the idea that sound is literally everywhere and we don't think about the places where it resides. You talked about the Heathrow airport being rebuilt for £4 billion, which in dollars is probably double. And they hadn't really factored in the noise and the sound associated with the place. And that's just not something that we think about. Where does sound reside in our home or in our places of work that we might be able to turn it down a bit? You mentioned that 40 decibels would be kind of the threshold to make sure it's no higher than generating from any appliance, if I'm not mistaken. But that over time, these kind of unnoticed sources of sound could be quite deleterious to our health. And I'm wondering, where does the sound reside and what can we do about it?
Well, again, it's very personal. I mean, there are stories of people who can only go to sleep with certain sounds. I mean, there's a famous English footballer who has to have the sound of a vacuum cleaner, presumably because that's how his mum put him to sleep when he was a baby. So it's very much individual, I think. And there may be people who adore certain sounds that I would find really obnoxious. So one person's music very often is another person's noise. Right. And it's hard to make generalizations.
Sure.
However, the kinds of sounds that you're talking about, electromechanical noise, I don't think many people really savor those enormously. I mean, the sound of HVAC, air conditioning, in a building, when it switches off, we become unconscious of it after a while. Any constant sound, you habituate to it. And, okay, I'm not listening to that anymore. I know it's there, and I'm still not listening to it. And there's a little bit of work going on in not listening to this irritating constant noise, which is why I think the research is now showing that even that HVAC and even masking sound, which is a constant kind of filtered pink noise, it's all day, you become unconscious of it. It does a job in masking, but it's creating stress because you're having to not listen to it the whole time. And that isn't something, it's not an absence, it's actually a bit of work going on to not listen to that. And of course, when that kind of sound switches off at 6 p.m, everybody goes, oh, and their shoulders go down 6 inches. And they go, oh, I didn't even realize isn't it lovely and quiet now? So that kind of sound, electromechanical sound, it builds up on us over time. And I wouldn't say it's very healthy for anybody unless anybody out there particularly adores it. And obviously, there are many other sounds which are irritating, frustrating, banging doors, squeaking escalators, whatever it may be. And there's probably stuff in your house, you might have a fridge that's very noisy. I'm the person who goes into American hotels and unplugs the ice machine, I'm afraid. Because, so many times I've sat in my hotel room and outside the door I can hear No, I'm not putting up with that. I'm sorry. And also the fridge, if I can get to the plug, which often you can't because it's in a huge piece of furniture, but I will unplug the fridge in the room as well. And people don't notice these really appalling noises. It's taken for granted. It's just part of life, but they're not good for you. So listening, I think, is a really important thing. And I hope, after this conversation, anybody listening to this, maybe that's opened a door for you. Conscious listening is such a wonderful thing. It's like turning up a new color in the world. It's like opening a door to a whole new dimension, and you can really start to enjoy it and be much more present in your life if you're consciously listening to what's around you.
Such a great point. One of the things that I've come to appreciate about you is that you know how to deliver a talk, as evidenced by the fact that 100 million people have watched your 5 TED Talks. You're captivating, and you lay out some of the basic tenets of good public speaking in your book, including some that I absolutely adore, such as keeping any slides limited to perhaps a word, certainly no bullet points, ideally pictures. But you've tapped into something that has caused people to listen. And one of the things that you do is you incorporate sound into your presentation itself so that people can have a firsthand, visceral experience of the sound itself as you are trying to transmit an important message, which to me was far more effective than any slide. And I was wondering, what do you think has caused people, in addition to the content itself, to watch your talks at such high volumes?
Well, that's an interesting question. On my website, there's a 20-minute video where I dissect the speaking TED Talk, which is the one that's number 7 of all time now, top American speaker coach called Neil Gordon. And it was very interesting to pull it apart and try and find out why that talk has been so successful. Content is one thing. I think I managed to come across an area which I've been passionate about all my life, which is sound and how it affects us. And, that relates into listening and speaking and personal communication skills, as well as the sound organizations make, which is what my business does. It kind of comes under the heading of obvious, but I never thought about it. And that's the reaction I get a lot of the time when I speak. Of course, I agree with everything you said. It's obvious, but I never thought about it.
Never thought about it.
And because we don't. So I don't know if that's luck, I suppose, that I happened onto an area which was important, obvious, and not considered. So content is the first thing. Chris Anderson, you'll remember this from the book. Chris said content is always the most important thing.
Of course.
Because if you haven't got the content and you're a brilliant speaker, it's just irritating.
Right.
If you've got the content, they can teach you how to speak. You can learn how to put it across. Then in terms of delivery, well, I guess I got better at them. I was the first person ever to use sound in a TED Talk, in the very first one, the 4 Effects of Sound. And they were very excited about that. It was natural for me because I've always incorporated sound in my life, and sound effects and so forth. I've run a recording studio and so forth. So using sound in that way was kind of natural to me. And I guess the tools had come along as well. I use Keynote on a Mac. I embed the sound in the slides. I cue them. I know exactly when the sound's going to happen. So it's like I've got my own sound engineer there because I know exactly when I press this button, that sound's going to happen. And I talk over them. So it's a mix of me and sound effects, which has proved to be very effective. And it's what I still do. I still go around. I'm off to Hawaii in January to do a talk. God forbid, that's a long flight.
From England for sure. But the payoff should be really great as soon as you leave the airport in Honolulu. It's such a great place.
So, yes, I think, I've been very lucky over the years and I enjoy very much speaking on stage. Content delivery, that's what that TED Talk was all about, the vocal toolbox, which we don't have really time to go into now. But, the tools of using this amazing instrument we've all been given, the human voice, which is, again, taken for granted by most people. Things like pace and prosody and space, not gabbling. It's the most common mistake I see people make, especially when they're nervous. Gabble, gabble, gabble. Most people who go on a TED stage are competent, and certainly now, because TED spend a lot of time training people or helping people to give of their best. I mean, it's not a matter of making them robotic or doing it a certain way, but what they're looking for is to help people express themselves, who they truly are. And, I talk in that TED talk about the foundations of powerful speaking, hail, and the authenticity, which is the A of hail, is really important. So authentically being yourself. The H is honesty. The I is integrity, which means being your word. And the L is love. And that's also something that I see a great deal on the TED stage. And it's pretty evident if you have somebody who's not coming from there. By love, I mean well-wishing, wishing people well. And remembering that you're standing there in front of one person or 1,000 or 10,000 with a gift to give. The reason you're there is to give a gift. It's to move people from where they are to where they will be at the end of this 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, whatever it is. And it may be inspiration, it may be transformation, it might be education, it might be amusement and entertainment, whatever it is, you're going to take them from here to there. And it's a gift. If it becomes all about you, and it's all about getting affirmation and applause and estimation and so forth, that's very transparent and people can spot that. And, I have seen that several times, even on the TED stage, where really it's all about somebody doing it for themselves. And it doesn't work very well. So that's possibly the most important rule about public speaking. It's not about you. It's about the gift you're giving. And if you stand in that and you're really in honesty, authenticity, integrity, and love, the nerves tend to go away because the challenge is getting the ball over the net, getting the gift out to the people. And it's not about, are they going to like me? Which is, that's where people get scared. Am I going to look like an idiot? Will people think well of me? And so forth. Let go of that and the nerves tend to go.
You're speaking to something so crucial, and that is how we can actually overcome anxiety, how we can overcome that self-conscious, self-focused process through love and authenticity and the other letters and the integrity and the honesty, that these serve, to use a psychological term, as anxiolytic components, things that reduce our anxiety. Gratitude also can do that. Just the fact that you're so happy you're there. And I will just tell you my felt sense of watching you. What was beautiful about it was that the dignity of your talk was bidirectional. You were imparting dignity on the audience. You were letting them know that you respected the audience. I felt respected even though you couldn't see me watching you. And I could tell that you gave respect to yourself in the content itself. And I think that probably acted to reduce any rumblings of anxiety that you might have been experiencing being on the TED stage and having someone like a Chris Anderson watching you.
Well, it's not just Chris, of course. And if you don't respect the TED audience, you won't respect any audience because you look out and, there's Bill Gates. There's Jeff Bezos. Yeah, it is quite a high-powered audience that you're speaking to. And certainly I was quite energized for the very first TED Talk I did. But, I had trained before that for years. I'd done quite intensive platform skills trainings. And before that, I'd run a business and given a lot of speeches. So, that wasn't the first time I'd spoken in public, obviously.
I could kind of tell.
But, I talk in the book and in the course, in my online course, there's a whole chapter on public speaking. And I talk about PPD, which is practice, prepare, deliver. So practice is just doing the skill of public speaking, which you can do with a few pals, have a little buddy group and meet around somebody's house every Tuesday night and all prepare a 2-minute talk and then critique each other and have a beer, whatever it is. Or, of course, you could join something like Toastmasters, which is all over the world, where the object is simply to practice this thing. I mean, you wouldn't want to go on stage and do a piano recital if you'd never practiced. But that's what makes people frightened about public speaking, because they haven't practiced. And naturally, that is scary. So, my experience of public speaking, I don't get nervous now at all, not even in front of 11,000 people, which is the biggest one I've ever done in Miami Beach. It was $1 million round table, I think, lots and lots of financial advisors from all over the world. No, nervous, no. Energized, excited, yes. So I have the good chemistry going on in my body, which is going to help me to perform at peak. Lots of adrenaline and testosterone and things like that, but not frightened. So as you practice the skill, become more and more consciously competent, you move into that zone where you can actually channel the nervous energy in a positive way. And that's just practice. So practice is the first thing. And then the prepare also is really important, because I've seen a lot of people fall flat on their face because they didn't prepare properly. And the biggest part of preparation is a very important question, which is one of the most important parts of my work and my book and my course. And I'm sure you remember this question: what's the listening?
Yes.
Because if everybody's listening is unique, and, there's a Gestalt listening. If you're speaking to 100 people, there's 100 individual listings there which form a Gestalt listening. It's here, now. It won't be the same in an hour, and it wasn't the same an hour ago, and it wouldn't be the same if it were 100 different people. So it's unique. And so your job, as you walk onto that stage, or as you start to speak to that person, it's true for one person, is to ask the question: what's the listening I'm speaking into? Simply by asking that question, my experience is you get more and more sensitive to it. And that's a practice which, if people take that up, will transform their speaking power. You hit the bullseye instead of missing the target altogether if you ask that question. Because, I've seen so many people really go badly wrong with tasteless jokes, or stories that don't work, or language that people don't understand. And I remember doing TEDx Athens, where I talked about the sound of democracy, which you'll be very unsurprised to learn is listening, in my view. And, it was quite a long day, that TEDx, and there were a lot of people speaking English to largely Greek audience, many of whom had headsets on, and there were translators at the back, who, by the way, I always go and talk to before I go on and give them any bits of strange vocabulary I'm going to use so that they're prepared. It's really important to talk to the people who are going to make or break your talk, the behind the scenes people, the AV crew, the translators, the people who are going to usher you on. Which way do I come off? Those kind of little things make a huge difference. And during the day, I was really surprised that a lot of these English-speaking speakers were going very fast, using jargon, not speaking particularly clearly. And you could look at the audience and there were frowns and furrowed brows everywhere as people were trying to make out what was going on. And I was particularly careful to speak at this kind of pace, and to keep it really straight and simple. And quite a lot of people came up to me afterwards and said, that was the first thing we've understood all day. Thank you. So that's speaking into the listening. I was conscious of that. I looked around the audience. I could see that going on, and I was determined to not fall into that trap. So ask the question, what's the listening? Apart from that, there's lots of other prep things which are in the course and the book, which we haven't got time to go into. And the deliver is all about BESS, which is breathe, big deep breath. Your voice is just breath. It's a great antidote to nerves as well. Expand the awareness. So I like seeing the whole room. And it's like being in peripheral vision, focusing on your peripheral vision, as opposed to lots of people I know will speak to one person at a time and just be looking around the room like that. And I'm not very comfortable with that, especially when they get stuck, because very often they'll get into the habit of looking at one person who then starts to feel incredibly uncomfortable. Me, what did I do? That poor person starts squirming as the speaker basically delivers the entire talk to them individually. So I like the whole room, and I can really see if there are any, areas where people are not taking it well or whatever. And then the first S of BESS is stance. My visualization is a string attached to the top of my head, and everything hangs from that. And if you have that visualization, your shoulders go down and back, everything gets nice and relaxed, you're level, everything should stack up pretty vertically, and you're ready to speak. It's very undistracting if you stand in that way. And then the other S, of course, as you walk on, is smile. which is a wonderful thing to do. A, it shows you're confident and happy to be there. And B, you talked about intimacy and relationship, even with a big audience. If you smile at them, you can look down into the front row and lots of people are smiling back at you. It forms a connection and it's a wonderful thing to do. So Bess is a very good way to start.
I think that's brilliant. And What's the Listening is an umbrella for so many ideas, including reading the room. It's also in terms of how you were describing how you make sure that you give your best self on the stage. I think about the charisma myth by Olivia Fox-Cabanier, who said that charisma is basically power, presence, and warmth. And really rocking those three attributes as you do is one of the reasons why I find you so compelling. You are charismatic, and that's a good thing. It's good for you. It's good for the message. It's good for the audience, and it's respectful of our time. Because if you didn't embrace your biggest self when you were up there, you would not be really honoring our time because you weren't showing up with your best stuff. And that's what you seem utterly committed to doing. Usually I ask a fantastical question that is rather consistent, but I've formulated something a little different for you, just in light of what's going on in the world today, in terms of there are so much riding on our abilities to listen, and it seems to be, let's just call it, it's an endangered species, perhaps. And that is a deep concern. And I'm wondering if you had the ears of CEOs everywhere, as well as high visibility politicians everywhere, who could listen better to the benefit of all stakeholders. How would you word your directive to them so that they paid attention and recognized that all stakeholders will benefit with greater listening? How would you phrase it?
Well, for any of them that are pointing in the right direction, by which I mean they have good intentions, and unfortunately that's not true of many world leaders at the moment. So, I don't know about evil and so forth, but there are certainly people who've got agendas which are not kind and who are not into increasing well-being and happiness in the world. But for those who are, I would say to them, conscious listening always creates understanding. And understanding is absolutely crucial in this world at the moment. As we speak, we've got a pandemic still stalking the world, the fourth bloom coming across Europe at the moment, hotspots in at least 3 different places where we could be seeing war breaking out between major powers. It's a scary time right now. It has been a scary time for a while. And it's not going to be helped by people shouting at each other. Politicians go off and have talks. I wish they'd go off and have listens and simply seek to understand the other person. Don't think this was so much in the book, but it certainly is what I talk about now. A listening position, which is one of the exercises in the book, a very important listening position, I think, is active listening, which has got 2 parts. The first part is reflection, where you repeat what the person said. And as a therapist, you'll be very familiar with this. So what I heard you say is, did I get you? Is that right? The second part is validation. And that is so important. Even if I disagree with you completely, I can see why you think that. Given the way you were brought up, or given your views, or given your experiences, it makes sense to me that you would think that. So I can respect you, and we can both be right in our own worlds, but the desire to be right is doing so much damage in the world. This confusion of opinions with facts that we see all around us, which creates at the best table thumping and at the worst great violence. And it is tragic because 2 people can be right in completely different ways given their perspectives. So listening colors our reality. And if we can listen to other people and understand them and allow them to have their reality, then I think we have a chance as a species. If we don't do that, then things could be pretty bleak.
And you're really speaking to something that a former guest of this podcast and the founder of Imago Therapy, Harville Hendricks, talks about in his version of couples therapy called Imago Therapy, which I think is one of the finest. And that is basically using love as a North Star rather than being right. Saying that my love for you is far more important to me than being right about a thing.
Absolutely.
And I really...
He said you can either be right or be in a relationship. I completely agree with that. And he said, but you can't curl up with being right at the end of the day.
You can't curl up with being right at the end of the day. Well, on that wise piece, I highly encourage all my listeners to please geek out to Julian's treasures. There are so many to enjoy. And of course, I was being a bit punny there by saying his treasures. What a fortuitous last name you've been given. The Treasure family crest must be quite lovely. But I've got to say thank you so much for honoring me with your time, your wisdom, and for all of the volumes of work that you're putting out to help heal a planet that needs to listen.
Hope so. Thank you so much for asking me, Adam. It's been really fun talking to you. So hopefully we spread some more ripples of listening in the world.
Indeed. It's been just great, Julian. And if by chance you find yourself in Silicon Valley, I would love to see you. The pint is on me.
Thank you.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe